Hi, this is my review of the Solitary GM. At the time of this review, this is a pay what you want document. You can get it at DriveThruRPG. I'm going to put the link in the description below. But I think there will be a new edition where they give more examples, certain things that will make the content a bit more clear. Now, what is this Solitary GM? The Solitary GM is basically player emulation. This reminds me of two conversations that I had with Marco from the Multiverso Distópico channel. I'm going to put the link in the description below to his channel. He hasn't been very active lately, but his channel contains videos covering different role-playing games, so it's well worth the watch. And it also reminds me of a conversation that I had with my friend Vincent, because both of those conversations have to do with the subject matter of the Solitary GM. Now, I couldn't find the comment or the conversation that I had with Marco, but it went something like this. We were talking about how it was somewhat difficult to run adventure modules and campaigns as a solo experience, or perhaps even as a co-op experience, because you already knew about the different challenges, the puzzles, the encounters. It's not impossible, but a lot of the fun is ruined or spoiled, potentially ruined perhaps, because you already know what is going to happen and there is no certain way as to how to handle how different player characters are going to tackle the different situations. So I talked to Marco and I said that I had at times experimented a bit with coming up with some random ways, kind of like the Mythic Game Master emulator way of determining yes or no. If you haven't seen my review of the Game Master emulator, or rather my video where I talk about solo role-playing games, I'm going to put the link in the description below, so you can check that out. But basically, I told Marco that depending on the environment, you could actually come up with some ways in which a class would be more effective because that class is more focused or geared towards a particular environment. So, for example, let's say you are navigating a dungeon inside of a city. Maybe it's some sort of suspicious looking warehouse or the sewers or a castle, anything, a manor. And the party of adventurers are moving through it and they encounter this trap. Maybe you are playing a solo role playing game, that is, you're using your favorite system, but using perhaps the Game Master emulator, but you come up to this puzzle situation and you do not know if one of the player characters is actually going to think about how to solve that puzzle. So that's quite the problem. But what I basically experimented with was thinking what class would have the advantage in that situation. So, for example, thieves, assassins, bards, perhaps a ninja, they would have an easier time figuring things out within a sort of urban type dungeon. So you could roll a yes or no check, like in what you do in Mythic, and they will have a high chance or high probability of figuring out the puzzle or navigating the trap, anything that is needed. And the barbarian, the druid, the ranger, unless you have some sort of variation like the urban ranger or urban barbarian and such, they would have a bit more of a difficult time trying to solve that puzzle or avoiding that trap. However, if the adventure side, sorry, going back to that, the role would have a disadvantage or a lower probability of success. But if the dungeon was a sort of wilderness type of environment, maybe some sort of cave, a cavern, cave complex sort of place, the forest, swamps, anything like that, or perhaps even a sort of woodland fortress, the barbarian, the ranger, the druid will have an advantage. And for them to try to figure things out in those places, they will have a higher probability of success on perhaps avoiding some hazards when compared to even the rogue. Although the rogue or the thief or any type of similar class would normally have an advantage trying to detect and disarm traps. I would still give a bit of an advantage to those wilderness gear type of classes, just for the sake of actually getting some surprises when you are running that module as a solo experience, because otherwise the player characters would always be finding the traps, solving the puzzles, or perhaps failing at them. So you need some sort of way of determining emulating the randomness of a real human being, because players, when they use their player characters, are coming up with some really sometimes crazy solutions. Sometimes they work, sometimes they are quite inappropriate for the situation. And so that's why I basically talked about when I talked with Marco. And now going back to what Vincent said, and I have his comment right here in my video of what makes a good solitary solo role-playing game adventure. Vincent said that he was exploring Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition as a solo experience. He has fiddled a bit with emulating players rather than game masters using classic adventure modules, and that's his favorite way to play solo. It gives him access to decades of adventures, and he can even tailor the emulated characters for the actual adventure, allowing him to experience both game mastering and character creation. And he feels like he has just scratched the surface of this sort of solo play style. So the Solitaire Game Master is a very simple document that has to do with that, creating the sort of artificial intelligence for the different player characters. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. Well, it's quite minimalistic. You do not have illustrations, you just have plain text, but everything is quite clear, well explained. You have different sections detailing the different mechanics or elements within this system to emulate players. So the document is quite straightforward. It's not bookmarked, but it's quite short. It's just 6 pages long. So the quality for what it is, considering that it's pay what you want, it's pretty good. And I think I only found like a couple of typos. So the quality is pretty good. Now let's talk about the contents. Well, first you have an introduction telling you how this came about as a sort of experiment, playtesting different things to see if you could actually play as a game master in a solo role-playing game. Because most emulators try to recreate a game master as a sort of artificial intelligence that referees the game. But if you wanted to participate as a game master and have all of those player characters taking on different pre-written adventure modules, it's going to be quite difficult. Because when you are having an emulated game master, you're basically making the adventure on the go. And like I mentioned in my video where I talk about solo role-playing games, that's quite handy, because as you're playing along, as you're playing that solo experience, you are creating an adventure. And after you're done with that solo adventure, you can use that framework that you created in that context and use it with your group. So that's a way of finding some entertainment and at the same time creating the adventure as you go along, so that you can use it with your players. So in this introduction, they tell you some reasons as to why you would want to emulate player characters rather than a game master. For example, maybe you have a role-playing game, and I think many of us have been there. We have this role-playing game that nobody else wants to play. It's somewhat annoying that throughout the years you're constantly looking for that group to play that role-playing game, but your group maybe wants to play fantasy or horror and it's not too much into sci-fi, or maybe it's the other way around, they are into sci-fi and they are not into horror or steampunk or whatever. So this is a way to have this sort of artificial intelligence powered group to play that role-playing game. Or maybe you want to run a campaign or an adventure, or you want to test a system. So this document will allow you to do all of that and more if you are willing to play a bit with the system, that is, make some tweaks or modify it. So they give you several reasons, but it's basically that. Maybe you have a role-playing game system or an adventure module or campaign that you have never played because you do not have the group, and you cannot play it as a solo experience because it could be a bit boring because you already know what is behind all those doors and the traps, and you need a way to add some randomness to the equation, or rather some unexpected actions. So then we have the meat of this system of player emulation, the 6 playstyles. These playstyles will allow you to determine how the player characters are going to act both inside and outside of combat. And this set of playstyles will also allow you to generate different player characters with different personalities and attitudes and make major decisions throughout the entire campaign. You have 6 of them, and you randomly determine how they apply by rolling a 6-sided die. So the first one is the power gamer. This is basically someone who wants to take advantage of the game rules. He exploits loopholes, and he always tries to get the advantage in any situation, no matter how much he has to twist the system to his advantage, to his convenience. Then you have the butt kicker. This is all about being straightforward, fighting, smashing things, kicking the door type of gameplay. And so this is pretty self-explanatory and very easy to understand. Then we have the tactician. Now here is where things start to become a bit muddled, not as efficient or as effective as I would like, because the tactician is basically someone who considers the game world to be real, and he wants to employ tactics. He wants to apply logic, some sensible thoughts on how to solve different problems and encounters, and that's basically it. However, after that we have the specialist ninja playstyle. So this is a bit difficult to tell apart from the tactician because ninja are also tacticians. And this is basically what would a ninja do. That is, a ninja would usually try to sneak about, gain access by climbing through walls stealthily, climbing up walls stealthily, and throwing smoke grenades and disappearing, all sorts of ninja type of tactics. But the tactician and the ninja could be a bit too similar. Ninja have all sorts of tactics that they employ in a variety of situations, so tactician and the ninja, they feel too similar. And when I play tested this system, and I play tested several times, what I basically did is that I handled the tactician as if you were to apply more conservative defensive tactics, perhaps even passive tactics, and the ninja would be a bit more aggressive, a bit riskier in his approach, in his tactical approach. After that we have the method actor, and this is basically taking the personality or psychology of the player character into consideration. So maybe your character is a sort of scoundrel that wants to avoid all sorts of rules and take some underhanded measures. That means that every time you roll this in when you have to take a choice, a decision, that character is going to act like a scoundrel. But what if your character's personality fits the specialist ninja playstyle, or the tactician, or the butt kicker? So that could also be a bit too similar. And then we have the storyteller style. This one is also quite confusing, but after reading further ahead in the document, I understood exactly what it was. It's basically someone who sees the game as an exercise in collaborative improvisational storytelling, and when making a decision, he wants to take the choice or make the decision that will move the story forward. But this is quite ambiguous because a lot of things could move or could push the story forward. Maybe some of the tactics employed by the ninja move the story forward, or maybe the kick in the door style of the butt kicker also moves the story, because if he's basically let's bring down the door, or yes, or crashing through the window or whatever. He's advancing the story. But what the storyteller basically is, it's a play style that wants to create interesting storytelling. So that means that every time you have to take a choice, you're going to take an option that creates an interesting story to tell, some outrageous situations perhaps that they have to do with the overall campaign, something that you would like to read perhaps in a novel or watch in a movie. So the storyteller is always going to choose that creative flow in a situation. Now, all of these styles are based on Robin's laws of good gaming. Robin's laws of good game mastering by Robin Laws. So I think some players could find these 6 play styles to be a bit limited. Maybe you want to modify them in some way, like Vincent said. Maybe you want to tailor or customize these styles for your particular adventure campaign. However, I played using that is all of the styles came about during different choices when I play tested this system, and they actually work quite well. You just have to be careful with the tactician, the specialist ninja, and the storyteller and method actor. The butt kicker and power gamer are pretty easy to handle and to apply, but when it comes to the others, it has to do a lot with the situation at hand. You can also use these styles to create your players. You can give them personalities, because maybe you created a wizard to participate in your solo campaign, and you roll to see the style, his primary style, and he's the butt kicker. So he's going to be a wizard that is constantly going to be using magic missile, fireball, trying to crush the opposition immediately. He's not going to use some subtle ways of solving the situation. He's not going to be using feather fall to perhaps take an alternate route. He's going to be smashing things. Or maybe you play as a fighter that works as a tactician. So he's a very cautious, very methodical fighter, constantly getting into formation with the other party members perhaps, not going into a dungeon until he obtains all the necessary information. It could be something like that. So basically, each player character that you are going to emulate using this system has 3 styles: the primary style, the secondary style, and the tertiary style. So you can get some pretty random combinations, and these styles come about during all decisions in the game. So maybe you're having this combat encounter and you're not sure what the thief is going to do. Is that thief going to attack using his crossbow perhaps? Or maybe he wants to flank the enemy and prepare to backstab when possible, maybe moving a bit further so that he gets behind the enemy lines and striking from behind. Or maybe he wants to hide. There could be several options. So with this table right here, you basically make a roll to see if you use your primary style, your secondary style, or your tertiary style. And you can even come up with a result that has nothing to do with your characters, with your player character styles. Because maybe you make a roll and you have this table that contains all of the 6 styles, and you end up the player character ends up doing something completely unpredictable. So that's basically it. Any type of situation, any type of choice, anything that is going to leave you thinking, what is my character going to do during that situation? So you make that roll, and something happens based on that choice or that play style. I think this is also a good system if you wanted to add some sort of artificial intelligence to hirelings and henchmen. Sometimes players and game masters do not find it too realistic when you're moving the henchmen and the hirelings and such however you like, because they are supposed to have their own personalities. So this solitary GM document could help you create some personalities for those non-player characters. And then you have information how to make big decisions. There could be perhaps a puzzle that is going to affect the entire adventure, perhaps the entire campaign. Maybe it's something that has to do with the character's survival, the immediate survival. Maybe it's some sort of trap that could cause a total party kill. So you basically roll 3 times on the tables that I mentioned, and based on the outcome and on the result, you come up with the best way possible as a combination of the 3 styles that you rolled. So, for example, maybe you rolled tactician once, and you rolled method actor twice. So that means that your character is going to employ some tactics to solve a particular encounter or situation, but he's going to put more emphasis on the player character's personality. Maybe you are assaulting a house in a city. Maybe it's a bandit hideout or a slave ring base or something, and you have this druid and you want to attack that place, and you roll tactician and method actor twice. So maybe you want to employ tactics that keep you out of harm's way, but the druid is actually a druid that does not have any fondness about or feelings about the city and structures, and he has no qualms or no remorse in destroying those structures. So maybe he wants to set the building on fire and try to smoke out the bandits or whatever he's chasing, and that could cause some problems for the city, because the fire that he starts maybe would be difficult to contain, but because he rolled method actor twice, he will take no precautions or some sort of will not plan ahead to minimize that damage. So you can have different combinations based on these 3 rolls that you make to handle those major choices. After that, you have some tips on how to handle combat, and that's pretty straightforward. You just use the combat system of the role-playing game that you are playing, and if there are major decisions, well, you make your rolls to see what sort of style comes into play. And they tell you how to create characters based on these styles, because during character generation, if you do not want to choose all of the different, let's say, feats and powers and spells, you can make some rolls to randomly determine what that player character, that artificial player character, is going to choose for his development, even while leveling up. So maybe you are creating this fighter and you start making your rolls, and you rolled specialist ninja. So now this fighter decides to take all sorts of finesse type of feats and abilities and powers depending on the system that allow him to be quite agile, quite stealthy, so very different from the archetypical or perhaps even stereotypical way of creating a fighter and leveling up, how to come up with some interesting ways on choosing feats and powers and abilities that break away a bit from the mold. Now, when it comes to puzzles, this is still an issue, because it's not easy. How can you determine if the character is going to search for some clues or traps, in the case that some sort of trap is involved with the puzzle, or how the party is going to solve any sort of enigma, question, any sort of problem? You basically, well, they give you a suggestion that you make your rolls, and if anyone comes up with tactician, you solve the puzzle. But I found this quite unsatisfactory when I playtested this system. What I basically did is I made the rolls for each of the player characters, and what made sense in the majority of both sort of way was what the player characters were going to do for that situation. So if you have this sort of trap that you have to guess an action based on a play of words, they tell you, and this is part of a mega dungeon that where I playtest this document. So I don't want to give too many spoilers, but they basically tell you a word that is related to an animal, but that animal, that word, could also be related to an action. So if you do not do that action, your character gets killed. So what I basically did is that I rolled for different. I had 4 player characters, and I rolled for each one of them, and actually 2 of them survived because, for example, one character, if I remember correctly, he rolled ninja. Yeah, he rolled ninja and tactician, and the other one rolled storyteller and ninja. And it had to do a lot with the way that the player characters played in the game. But the other ones rolled butt kicker, and method actor, and the character's personality was a sort of very straightforward, somewhat reckless type of character. So they got killed in that room, but the other ones survived. So that's one way of handling puzzles, but it's still not the best way. Maybe in the future there would be a better system, who knows? Or maybe you yourself, while you are playing this, using this document, you could come up with a better, more creative solution how to handle puzzles and traps and other things like that. And they even give you some final tips on how to tweak the system, how to add some variations, perhaps replacing the different play styles. Like I mentioned, 4 of them are a bit not as clear on how they should be applied, in my opinion. But despite all of that, um, what I think of this document is that it takes a step in the right direction. There are many game master emulators out there, and many systems and subsystems that include modes for solo play. In my video where I talk about solo role-playing games, I mentioned several of those systems. I think in the future, maybe I should come up with an update video where I add more solo role-playing games or co-op role-playing games to the mix, and perhaps even bring out a video where I give some tips and advice on how to have a smoother, faster, more efficient solo experience, because nowadays sometimes you really get quite busy, and throughout the years I found some ways on how to make the process a bit more smooth, more slick. So overall, the Solitary GM, it's definitely worth it that you check this document out, especially if you are a game master and you have that role-playing game or that adventure and campaign and you simply cannot find a group. Maybe you can even find a group online, or maybe you do not like playing online. I usually prefer playing at a physical table. So, and this is a way to bring out your tiles, your miniatures, your dice, and instead of just waiting to convince your group or finding another group to play that role-playing game or that adventure campaign that you always wanted to play, the Solitary Game Master is going to give you the way to do that. And even if you do not like perhaps the play styles or some ways on how you use the tables to determine different random outcomes, you could take all of these styles and the tables and use them as a sort of base or framework to come up with your own game styles, your own tables, ways of solving things. Like Vincent said, maybe you, for a particular campaign, you create 6 styles specific to that campaign or that role-playing game system. So I highly recommend that you check out the Solitary GM. It's definitely worth a look and using it, of course. Now, when it comes to my role-playing game reviews, I'm going to bring out a review for a really good campaign. Last year, I reviewed the box set for that particular fantasy role-playing game. I want to keep things a bit like a surprise, but this is an amazing campaign. It's quite magnificent. Not only because of all of the elements, the intrigue, the non-player characters, the sites, but because the execution, it really helps you to run that campaign as in the most efficient and effective way. So definitely look forward to that one. I will try to bring it out, if not next week, the week after that. It's going to be a really, I think it will surprise you as to how good that campaign is. Well, thanks again for watching this video, and thank you to those that have been sending Drive-Thru RPG gift certificates to support the channel. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Oh, and just a reminder, at the moment of this video, there is currently a sale at Drive-Thru RPG. It's the Game Master March 4th sale. So I recommend that you check it out. They have a lot of PDFs on sale, especially if you're looking for Dungeons and Dragons stuff, those old TSR documents and all of that. Definitely check it out. And I think they also have sales on other sites, so keep your eyes open. Once again, thank you and see you later.